Welcome to the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership Podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a drop of straight talk you can't get anywhere else. We discuss the whiskeys to drink, music to listen to, and what it really takes to be an effective leader. I'm your host, Galen Bingham, the leadership strategist. Tonight's guest, dynamic global healthcare executive, strategist, and professor, Dr. Chris P. Boone. Hey, what you drinking? Okay, here's another one. Here is another one where you're going to have to start a brand new book of notes because the last book I know is jam-packed. We keep throwing these amazing guests at you, and I don't apologize for that at all. Every time I meet someone amazing, I feel compelled to want to bring them on to the show. And so I'm going to do that here again today. But this is someone who has already been through the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership experience. We've actually done it live on a stage together. And after it was over, I said, man, I got to introduce you to the actual audience. So community, please welcome Dr. Chris Boone. Welcome to the show, my man. What's going on with you?
Oh, I'm living a dream, brother. I'm glad to be here. We're round two with you.
well, fantastic. Well, hey, man, we got a lot to get into, to pick up from where we left off. We're going to talk a little bit about that experience that we had, because I think that was the first Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership live that I have ever done, and you were such a hit. I had to bring you to my regular guest here. But the first question, and folks know that this is probably one of the more important questions. This is right up there with why is there air? That question is, so what you drinking?
Right now, I'll tell you, I'm drinking Guru energy drink, which is just a natural energy drink. And really, the reality is behind that is that after this, I'm going to try to go get a workout in and get myself fit so I can live a long life. But I will say that, I'm more of a wine drinker when I'm drinking, at dinner or socially. And Malbec tends to be my wine of choice. But
Okay, all right. I think you may be one of the first energy drinkers we've had on the show. We've had some whiskey drinkers, we've had some wine drinkers, we've had some water drinkers, some tea drinkers, but I don't know that anyone has checked the energy drink box. So you stand alone, man.
yeah, this is plant-based though, shout out to Guru giving us clean energy drinks.
Oh, all right. Well, again, that means that I need to maintain the integrity of the podcast. And I almost brought some Tawny Port. I was almost going to bring that, but I thought, there might be a riot outside if I'm not drinking whiskey. So I decided to go with, this is a brand, a distillery that we have featured ad nauseum. We've had so many close opportunities to possibly interview the founder and key executives from this distillery. We actually had their VP of operations there here on the show a couple of seasons ago, Miss Sherry Moore. Fantastic conversation, but I'm gonna hit Uncle Nearest again. Now, this is a relatively new Uncle Nearest for me because this is Uncle Nearest single barrel. Now, I found this in Chicago. A lot of toast to Benny's Liquor Barn, and they had some Uncle Nearest single barrel. This one is clocking in at 119. So this is about as close to grown folks as you can make happen. And I'm going to tell you, the last time I cracked this open, your boy had to put an ice cube in his glass. I had to chill it down just a little bit. But I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this in my Uncle Nearest glass. So I'm just a little taste here.
Shout out to Uncle Nearest.
Fawn Weaver. Oh, came so close to interviewing Fawn Weaver, but Sherry Moore did not disappoint. And Oh my gosh, this is some really, really good juice. Not only do I like the story and like the company, but this is actually really, really good juice. So while I enjoy this single barrel, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your background, because you've had I think a somewhat non traditional journey to land at the heights and to sit on the stages that you sit on. But man, I'll tell you, it's just so inspiring. So now that I've propped you up, share a little bit about your background and that story so we can get into this conversation like I'm going to get into this single barrel, Uncle Nearest.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You know, I'm originally from Dallas, Texas, the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, for those who are familiar. You know, I'm a true Dallas native, meaning I went through Dallas public schools and ultimately ended up at the University of Tulsa. After I finished my degree there, you know, I had the great fortune of doing a number of internships. I was part of the Inroads program, for those who are familiar with Inroads, and was blessed to be able to do internships at some big companies, TXU here in Dallas, Phillips Petroleum there in Oklahoma, and you know, and was pretty much on that path to doing a traditional like corporate job. But I do recall like my senior year in college, you know, sort of wrestling with what I really wanted to do post graduation, and it's when I started to really discover that I was a person that was really sort of motivated by passion. You know, I needed to feel connected to the work that I did, and I was talking to one of my professors at the time, and she sort of and I was sort of explaining my situation. I was like, hey, I got these many corporate internships I've done, but I really walk away feeling unfulfilled, right? And don't really feel like I'm sort of living in my purpose, if you will, right? And so she just asked me a simple question. She said, what do you like to do? And I said, you know, honestly, I mean, at the heart of it all, I just like to help people, right? And make a difference and man, like you're making an impact. And then she looks at me and she goes, well, have you ever considered like healthcare as an option? And I was thinking, no, not really. I never really wanted to be like a doctor or nurse or anything of the sort. And then she goes, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying more on the administration, the business side of it. And I was like, hmm. She said, go back and do your research on it. So I went back and I started looking at hospital administration. And I was like, yep, this is exactly what I want to do. Right. So I sort of sought out that I was going to be the next CEO of a public hospital. The one in Dallas is called Parkland Hospital, where I was working with helping underserved communities and you know, and really getting them the best patient care that I can get. So I got tunnel vision with that, right? Once I locked in and the vision was clear, it was all about execution. And so I moved back to Dallas, honestly, with you know, without a locked in job at the time, very focused on trying to get into the healthcare space. And I remember it's funny because I had to take a job at a J.C. Penney distribution center,
Mm, mm.
doing like IT support work for like literally. I must have did that for like 4 or 5 months before I got my big break into healthcare, and I joined the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and sort of the rest is history from there. And you know, I went through several pivots and evolutions along the way, but I don't think I ever really predicted that I would end up where I am. And I certainly didn't expect that I would have the level of, I like to describe it as multi-dimensionality, meaning that I have these different careers that I'll do that make up who I am. But I struggle with the fact that I don't think I could just do one of those. I have to do all of those things to feel like I'm fully living in my purpose. But that's been my mantra.
Yeah, you know, so there are just so many things I'd love to get into. Number one, I love that you talked about how when people think about healthcare, they think of being a doctor, they think of being a nurse, but there is almost every career that you can think of, from IT, from operations, from, you know, you can do almost anything in that healthcare genre that folks just don't normally think about. Talk a little bit about that discovery where you came to realize that being in healthcare didn't mean being a doctor or wearing a white coat or doing the things that you typically would think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think once I locked in and had the tunnel vision, I was like, okay, CEO, public hospital, helping people that look like me in these communities, in urban communities, and so I jumped at the chance. UT Southwestern, shout out to them, really allowed me to sort of get into that space and get my feet wet. But then, and I had the opportunity to sort of hop to different health systems in the North Texas, the Dallas Fort Worth area, and get broad experience. But this is the thing: as I got more into it, the more I realized I didn't feel as fulfilled in that either, like in that sort of
Mm.
particular profession. And I started to think broadly, and ultimately, that's when I got to the point where I decided I wanted to do a PhD. And and in my head, I was thinking like, how can I really? Because remember, my mantra: live in your purpose, make an impact. And I was like, how can I make the biggest impact in healthcare? What's really driving it? And around the time we were in the presidential election, and what would ultimately be President Obama winning that election, I decided to do a PhD, and I decided to do it with a focus in health policy. And because I was thinking like, well, there's no better way to influence the system than through public policy. But and I remember several people like looking at me like, dude, what are you going to do with a PhD? I mean, and you're doing it in this. How does that even connect to what you do? You kind of have this IT background. I mean, how does that even connect? And at the time, I honestly don't think that I'm not going to sit here and say I have this level of clairvoyance that I knew that it was going to all come together and converge and tell this beautiful story. But I felt like in many respects, I was just being guided and I was being obedient with it. And ultimately, it did work out. And the interesting thing about it is that I ended up in pharma, but I never thought in my life I would ever work for a pharmaceutical company. Like if you would have asked me up until 2016, would I ever work in a pharma company? And by 2017, I'm working in Pfizer. So it was it's pretty hilarious. I mean, what I always tell people that I mentor and folks that I talk to is, you never know where you're going to be. You just got to be open to it and be willing to pivot. And your talents can be utilized in so many spaces, as you just said, with healthcare is so big, so massive, so diverse, so many. It's a collection of industries, really, right? And there's so many things that you can do to build a beautiful career. But I think the thing that I learned along the way is really the art of the pivot, right? The art of being able to reinvent yourself, the art of being to understanding some of your own core competencies that are transferable to other domains, other industries, other jobs, even. I don't think I've ever had the same job twice. Like every single job I had has been different. And they may have some similarity to a previous job to where I can leverage something, but for the most part, the role has always been different because I allowed myself to have a growth mindset and allowed myself to experiment and not being afraid to fail as work to my benefit.
Well, fantastic. Well, hey, man, you're starting to get into the part of this conversation that I always like to ask my guests to help me define, and that is the name of the show, Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but it's the metaphor that I enjoy. The metaphor of whiskey is doing what you enjoy with the folks you enjoy it with. This conversation, this is whiskey for me. Jazz, the metaphor of jazz is how do you pivot? How do you take advantage of what's going on in the room, even when the plan is not as straightforward as you thought it was going to be? And then leadership really comes down to making a decision and taking action. There's a place for strategy. There's a place for marketing. There's a place for research. But at some point, someone's got to take action if anything's ever going to happen. How does that metaphor fit in how you have navigated your career? And does that make sense? I mean, there's only one PhD in this conversation. So help me explain this. Help me explain this metaphor.
I don't think you need a PhD for that one, man. I love the metaphor and I love the way you described it because for me, I guess the whiskey was discovering what my sort of purpose and the mark that I was sort of placed here to leave on this earth. And I think that's really about improving humanity and improving public health on a global scale, which, by the way, was one of the things I uncovered as I was going through and I was in that sort of hospital administration route. I started to really come to the realization that I really wanted to make a global impact in countries around the world, not just in my local community. And the question is, how could you do that, right? That was one of the things that I was wrestling with. But when it comes to the jazz piece, people always, I get the question like, how did you navigate it? What did you do? What were you thinking? And I would love to tell them that I had this master plan, but I didn't. I adapted constantly, right? And I lived in the moment, and I knew, and I followed my instincts, and I followed my passions, and I always knew though. I always knew how to put myself in the right positions to maximize my talent. So it took a high degree of self-awareness at an early age to say, yeah, that situation seems really, really cool, but I don't think that's the right team for me right now. And nor do I think it's going to add to my tool belt to prepare me for the next thing, right? And that's why I was telling you, I've never done the same job twice, because the reality is doing the same job twice, it's not additive to what I'm trying to do, right? It's all about being comfortable in this idea of being uncomfortable. And I think that's a big thing. And leadership for me, both personally and professionally, is certainly about taking action. It's being accountable to those actions, which I think is what people want to take action. What they don't want is the accountability if it doesn't go right, right? And I'm a person who's never shied away from holding myself accountable for the decisions that I make, but also having the resilience and grit to pick myself up and keep pushing through it, right? That's a direct sort of, I would say, outcome of upbringing, life experiences, right? Not things that can necessarily be taught through any degree program or any university setting. It's just about, who are you when all the things are stripped away, right? And I think that if anyone were to describe me, they would like, this guy has to be one of the most resilient guys I've ever seen, right? And he will continuously pick himself up. Failure, success, doesn't matter. I treat it all the same.
Wow. Yeah. Let's get into that a little more because, as I heard your story when we met, supporting the Executive Leadership Council, I kept thinking of a chance meeting I had with now Governor Westmore. When I met him, he was author. He was just author Westmore. And he had a great story. He had just published, I think, his second book, but he was talking about where he was talking about the other Westmore, where there were two people, he being one of them, with the exact same name in the exact same neighborhood, but they both took totally different paths to life. And because he took a different path, he is now Governor Westmore. And the other Westmore is not. Let's just say he's not, right? He took a decidedly different path through the events of his life. When I heard your story, kind of the upbringing, the people that you were hanging out with, just the friends, right? We all have friends when we're 15, 16 years old, but you took a decidedly different path. But if you take a look at their lives today, you could see where your life could have been had you gone left as opposed to going right. Talk a little bit about that pivot, that journey, and how, to your point, you're just doing the next thing, but that's led you to a very profitable place.
Yeah, no, that's it's interesting. I mean, when just hearing you describe it and sort of puts me back in that place where you think about all the inflection points that you had, whereas one little decision to go left could have set me off on a whole different trajectory. And I think I've had so many points where those moments were pivotal. And as I think about it and I sort of recant some of the folks that I grew up with, and some of them that I know about where they are and what they're doing, and I'm sure that if they could do it all over again, they would have done it differently. But, the one thing I will say though, is something about growing up in the hood, because some people, they really sort of become protective of their own in some degree, right? That's where the love comes in. It's when you're from this hood. And I think that generally most people knew that I was different, right? And they knew that if I tried to play thug, or if I tried to do something that was completely out of character, it's me really trying to be that rather than trying to be myself. And I don't think that I ever got forced in that direction because people were like, nah, just leave him alone. He's a different kind of guy. He was the guy, I was the guy that walked around with his backpack all the time. But it didn't mean that I wasn't faced with adversity and challenges, and didn't mean I didn't have to run away from the crowds when trying to get jumped on. All the things that people experience when you grow up in a hood, I trust me, I've been through it. I've done it. And I was joking with one of my buddies about it earlier because he went through the same thing. He said he developed all of his speed from running away, and jumped people. I got extremely athletic by being raised, and I think that we all did, and it's kind of like when you're trying to do something different, you really got to be locked in on it. And I think the bigger challenge for me was being the first to do it in the family, right? And then the immediate extended, right? It was something that the crown jewel was, graduating high school. I think that was like the pinnacle. You did that, you were golden. You were like, that's great, right? Because we got some people who didn't do it, right? And so I think, but to have this bigger vision that your family doesn't quite understand. And I remember, I'll share this story. I mean, I remember when I was probably in the fifth or sixth grade. I just remember riding in the car with my mom's and at the time my stepfather, and I just blurted out randomly that I wanted to be a CEO. And my mom's probably don't even remember the story, but I said, yeah, I want to be a CEO. And she kind of looked at me like, well, what's that? And I was like, I don't fully know, but I know it's the person at the top, and that's what I want to be. Right. So, it's kind of, it starts with like this vision that's instilled in you. You don't fully understand why, but you know that it's something different. And I remember being, when they would have these career days, Galen, when they would have these career days at my school, they were bringing like people who were driving 18-wheeler trucks, and they were like, hey, they make $40,000 a year. You can make $40,000 a year too. And I was like, $40,000 a year to drive, and so, but this is the conditioning that it takes, right? So we weren't introduced to corporate professional jobs. That was just not even anything that anybody could fathom. And so, it's an interesting thing because I feel sort of obligated to sort of introduce that opportunity to kids like myself who never seen it and never really believed that could be done, or believed you have to be from a certain socioeconomic background or whatever part of the country in order to achieve that dream. And what I tell people is that my dream, CEO, fifth to sixth grade, didn't know what it is, had never seen it. All I seen is the 18-wheeler drivers, but something inside me was like, no, there's something bigger that you can go after. And I always remember that. I always carry that with me.
Wow, that I mean that is so compelling, because it's easier. It's not still not easy, but it's easier to accomplish something that you've seen before. But if you've never seen it before, there has to be something inside of you that pulls you to try to accomplish something that you've never seen before. So that's always impressive to me. One of the things that I often think about when I think of you, because you brought this out. This was some of the early research I did on you before our conversation with the ELC. And every time I see you online, you remind me of this ability to combine data with storytelling. Because very often you think of those as being separate, and you think someone is either data minded, right? They're left. That's your left brain. You can handle the analytics, or your right brain, and you can tell a story. But you've got the ability, and you even said that it's an imperative for executives to be able to combine data with storytelling. Talk a little bit more about the combination of the two.
Yeah, context matters, my friend. I mean, you can give all the data you want, but if there's no context as to what that data is drawing insights from, then how do you really action around it? Right? I mean, it seems like it's a blinded way. I believe in qualitative and quantitative data. That qualitative is where you really start to get into creating the context. And then you have to pull it all, you have to weave it all together to tell a full story. And I think the thing is in my sort of world, and honestly, keep in mind, I never sought out to do the public speaking thing. I never even thought I was good at it, to be totally honest. And so, but I kept getting requests to do it. And I was like, why these people, it almost like you suffer from some form of imposter syndrome. You're like, why do you keep asking me to do that? I think I'm gonna get exposed at some point. They're gonna think I'm a fraud, right? But what I think I leaned into is my authenticity. I found my own voice, right? I didn't try to emulate anything that I seen. I learned to speak in the way that felt natural to me. And
Yeah.
the most natural thing to me and how I learned is through storytelling, right? But I'm also, to your point, you're sort of this left brain guy who's very sort of data driven and scientific. So it can't just be, fictional stories that you're spewing. It has to be grounded in something that I can say is real. I never thought that that was a skill. I thought everybody did it, right? And so just I'm almost like, how do you do that without doing that? And it wasn't until I started to get more and get all these, speaking opportunities that I've had over the years that I started to realize that people identify with it. And I actually started, I had an executive coach tell me one time, have you ever explored why people even engage you? I mean, because just like you said, I mean, you're kind of like this data scientist guy, and most people don't want to hear from folks like that. You're like back office thing. And I said, honestly, I don't really know. He said, I think you ought to start just tapping into it and understanding what people are connecting with you, because it can't just be about the data and all of that.
Yeah.
I started asking people. I started just doing like informal like surveys, like, hey, they'd be like, hey man, I loved your talk, I loved your speech, I loved it. And I said, honestly, tell me what did you really learn or love about it? And he said, it's just something about the relatability factor that I connected with. They like, I could tell that you're very deep, but you didn't make me feel that I was incompetent by listening to you. I felt like you were just engaging me in a conversation and we were just talking about a topic and you would happen to throw out factoids or data points that are sprinkled throughout the conversation. I said, huh. So that's the secret sauce.
Hey, it's not too late. Hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch the next episode. If you're really enjoying the vibe, leave us a review or become a VIP for guest and show exclusives. Cheers.